Hello, it's Simon Jones from Antiques for Everyone. Today I've brought along two cold-painted bronzes. Now, cold-painted bronzes were a really popular technique that was developed in the 19th century, particularly in Austria and around Vienna. And as the name would suggest, it's cold-painted, so it's actually fired, cast in bronze, and then it would be cold painted at a later date. They would use a very difficult technique using layers of colour to make these wonderful coloured and detailed bronzes. And these sort of techniques have long been forgotten, and it would be very difficult to try and replicate now. As they developed these cold painted bronzes, they made more and more figures for the market, particularly in Europe. They would produce a variety of animal and human figures, and animals became incredibly popular. There are lots of people that collect cold-painted cats or dogs, horses. There's a whole variety of these items. And at one time, there were around 50 foundries in and around Vienna and Austria producing these bronzes. They were incredibly popular in the late 19th century and early 20th century. One of the great names was a chap called Franz Bergman, and he developed a whole range of figures and animals. And I brought along two items today which show some of the items that were made at his factory. Now, the first thing to say about these is they're made in bronze. So the first thing when you pick them up is the weight. It's immediately obvious that it's heavy. Now, if this was made in another material like a gilt metal or a spelter, it would be much lighter. But this is made in bronze. It's much, much heavier when you pick it up. The other thing with bronze, when you look underneath, you can see the colour of the bronze coming through. Now, if this was a metal of some description, that would tend to wear off and you get sort of different metals appearing underneath. Now, in this case, we've got a couple of donkeys with Arab boys, and Arab figures were particularly popular with Bergman. He would do things like carpet sellers and things of that description. They were a very popular motif. You sometimes get figures seated on camels, that kind of thing. And they were very popular. As you can see, it's beautifully modelled and nicely painted. The paint has faded back in colour over time, but you have to consider this is well over 100 odd years old, so it's bound to have lost a little bit of colour over time. Underneath they have some stamps. Now, the Bergman stamp is a B within an urn shape. Having that Bergman mark makes them much, much more saleable than if they were just unmarked or just had a number on the bottom. Bergman is the best. So that makes these much more commercial and saleable to collectors. Because he is very popular and collectible, you also get lots of fakes. Because there are lots of fakes around, you have to be very wary when you're buying them, and it generally comes with experience of handling these items and seeing these items to tell whether they're genuine old ones, whether they're much more modern reproductions, which we see from time to time. And there's a huge difference in value from the genuine one to a much more recent example. So you have to be a little bit wary when you're collecting these. But these are genuine Bergman pieces made in the late 19th century or early 20th century, something in that sort of region. And even there are only small examples, they'll probably still make perhaps 400 to 600 each, something in that sort of region. They're very popular. And I've sold some very unusual ones. I remember selling a large racehorse by Bergman a few years ago, which made a couple of thousand. So he is a very, very collectible factory. And the fact that you can't replicate cold-painted bronzes in the same way these days, because those techniques and methods are lost, means that there is only a limited number of these things around, and their commercial value will, I'm sure, continue to rise.